All right, so we're going to go back to the beginning. We got sidetracked today, so let's talk about understanding residents' rights, advocacy, and grievance procedures. So basic human rights are protected by the Constitution. Laws that clarify these rights are the right to be treated with respect, right to live in dignity, the right to pursue a meaningful life, and the right to be free of fear. Behaviors that actually infringe on these rights are addressing our residents as children. Hey, sweetie, hey, sugar, hey, honey. Using demeaning nicknames for the residents, leaving doors open during a bath. And that's a big thing. I want you to think about how you would feel if you were taking a bath and the door was left wide open. It's pretty embarrassing. And then threatening a resident with harm. OBRA of 1987 is the Residents' Bill of Rights. You need to know OBRA 1987. Residents' Bills of Rights have ethical and legal basis. States have adopted or codified these rights into law. OBRA Residents' Bills of Rights must be posted in every long-term care facility, and they must inform the residents of their residents or their guardians of these rights. And it needs to be very, very detailed. Remember, OBRA is the Omnibus Reconciliation Act, which you learned in Health Science 2. So OBRA of 1987, Residents' Bill of Rights. Residents have the right to be treated with consideration, respect, and full recognition of their personal dignity. It needs to be recognized that in an institutional setting, each and every resident cannot have complete freedom. However, individual choices like sleeping patterns, food choices, flexibility in bathing, religious preference, clothing choices, and friendships must be respected. The staff of the facility should speak courteously with the residents at all times. Staff should call residents by their preferred name and avoid terms such as sweetie, baby, etc. Always knock before you enter a room, and if the resident is able to respond, wait for their response. Knock even if the door is open. The resident can see you, or if the resident can't respond. Always knock. Privacy should always be ensured. The door should be shut, the privacy curtain pulled, the blinds should be shut at night, or when care is to be given for the resident. Residents have the right to receive care, treatment, and services which are adequate and in compliance with rules. The facility must have the capability to provide that type of care that the resident needs. For example, a facility that does not have the capability to care for someone who is ventilator dependent, which means they need help with respirations, should not accept a resident who has a ventilator. A resident who requires physical therapy should not be admitted to a facility where there are no physical therapy services available to them. The staff of the facility should be properly licensed to provide the treatment needed. Failure to provide adequate and appropriate care is a violation of this law. It's expected that a prudent administrator will, through effective management, monitor staff's performance to assure that no resident's health, safety, or welfare is endangered. Residents have the right to receive at the time of admission and during their stay a statement of charges and services. It must be written, has to be provided by the facility, including those required to be offered on an as-needed basis, and of the related charges. Charges for services not covered under Medicare or Medicaid must be specified. The resident should sign as evidence that this information has been given. Charges not included in the facility's basic daily rate should be given to the resident. These things may include beautician services, cosmetics, some personal items, things that you would go to the store to pick up. Residents have to be informed in advance of any changes in the cost or the availability of services. Residents have the right to have on file in the patient record the orders of the attending physician with the proposed schedule of medical treatment. Written evidence of informed consent to participate in research must also be evident if the resident is participating in a research project. Each resident's diagnosis must be in the medical chart along with an individualized plan of care for the resident. Resident and the resident's legal representatives must be invited to be involved in the care planning process. Federal patients' rights require that each resident be informed of his medical condition and also provide for a resident to refuse treatments. These federal rights apply to nursing facilities that participate in the Medicare and the Medicaid programs. Our residents have the right to privacy. To receive respect and privacy in the patient's medical care program, case discussion, consultation, and treatment shall remain confidential and shall be conducted discreetly. Personal and medical records shall be kept confidential, and written consent of the patient shall be obtained for their release to any individual other than family members, except as needed in the case of the patient's transfer to another healthcare institution or as required by law or third-party payment contracts such as an insurance agency. Generally, most facilities require written consent before the release of confidential information, such as would be found in a resident's records. Access should be allowed to staff and consultants involved in the resident's direct care and only on a need-to-know basis. Residents have the right to access their own medical, social, and financial records. Under federal nursing home requirements, facilities have up to 24 hours to make records available to residents or their legal representatives. Records can be photocopied upon request of the resident or their legal representative. However, the prevailing community rate may be charged by the facility for those photocopies. Residents have the right to be free from mental and physical abuse and, except in emergencies, to be free from chemical and physical restraints unless authorized for a specific period of time by a physician according to clear and indicated medical needs. Residents should always be treated courteously and professionally by facility staff. Acts of humiliation, harassment, threats, or deprivation are examples of mental abuse. Chemical and physical restraints are not to be used to control or limit residents' mobility for the convenience of staff or as a substitute for staff supervision. Likewise, restraints should not replace development of individualized care plans for dealing with difficult behaviors. The use of either type of restraint, be that chemical or physical, should be the last alternative after all other methods of dealing with the problem have been exhausted. A physician may write orders for restraints to be used in an emergency situation. However, blanket standing orders for, quote, restraints PRN, which means to restrain as needed, are not permitted. So our residents also have the right to receive from the administrator of the facility a reasonable response to all requests. Facilities should not arbitrarily dismiss or ignore residents' requests, which are not excessive and which would not improve the quality of their life. On the other hand, residents should not expect that every request will or can be granted without consideration of practicality or potential harm to a resident's health or safety. In all cases of denial, facilities must explain to the resident why a particular request cannot be granted. Facilities should document the denial of a request if a particular resident becomes upset. So residents also have the right to associate and communicate privately without restriction with persons or groups of the patient's choice or the patient's invitation, or that of a person or groups at any reasonable hour to send and receive mail promptly and unopened unless the patient is unable to open and read their personal mail. To have access at any reasonable hour to a personal telephone where they may speak privately, and have access to writing instruments, stationery, and postage. finished. So the next one is our residents have the right to manage their financial affairs unless authority has been delegated to another person pursuant to a power of attorney or a written agreement, or some other person or agencies have been appointed for this purpose pursuant to the law. So this isn't something that you can just willy-nilly say, I'm taking care of this person's money. Nothing shall prevent the patient and facility from entering a written agreement for the facility to manage the patient's financial affairs. In the event that the facility manages the patient's financial affairs, there has to be a full accounting available for inspection and furnished to the patient with quarterly statements of the patient's account. The patient has to have reasonable access to this account at reasonable hours. The patient or the facility can terminate that agreement at any time, but it has to be either have to be given 5 days notice. So our residents also have the right to enjoy privacy and visits by the patient's spouse, or if both are residents of the facility, they have to be afforded the opportunity to share a room. The intent of this right is to assure that there's a method of arranging for privacy that's reasonably necessary for visits between spouses. In the case of a semi-private room or wards, other special arrangements may have to be made. There should be provisions to assure conjugal visits and that complete privacy can be maintained at all times. Husbands and wives have the right to share a room unless, in the judgment of the attending physician, to do that would adversely impact the health of one or both residents, or one of the residents refuses to be in the situation living with their spouse. So our residents also have the right to privacy in their room, which means, if you think about it, you wouldn't want someone to just barge into your room. So a partially closed door or drawn curtain allows privacy from staff and visitors as they pass in the hallways. Residents' rooms should not be used for ingress or egress to other areas of the building. Likewise, residents' telephones and private bathrooms should not be used by unauthorized persons. Provisions should be made to allow residents to be alone at times when they wish, and also not to be interfered with during their medical care. A resident's personal items or belongings should not be searched unless there's a justifiable cause. Residents should be present whenever staff deems it necessary to move belongings for cleaning purposes. So our residents also have the right to present grievances and recommend changes in policies and services personally or through persons or in combination with others on the patient's behalf, or for that of the facility, or that of others to the facility staff, the community advisory committee, the administrator, the department that they're in, or other persons or groups without fear of reprisal, restraint, interference, coercion, or discrimination. Each facility should have procedures in place for receiving resident recommendations for change within the facility. Likewise, facilities should have grievance procedures established which residents may use when they have complaints. It's important that all concerns and complaints be addressed and appropriate follow-up action be taken, which would include following up with the complaining party as to the outcome of the process. There should also be policy and procedure to assure that each and every resident has the privilege of contacting any outside person, agency, or group without restraint or interference from the facility. Please post a listing of outside agency which residents and families can contact for advocacy or complaints. So residents also have the right to not be required to perform services for the facility without personal consent and the written approval of the attending physician. They also have the right to retain or secure storage for and to use their personal clothing and possessions when reasonable. Prior to admission, the facility should clearly specify in writing any limitations on the amount and type of personal property or clothing that's allowed. Within reason, each resident should be able to decorate their living space with personal pictures, small sentimental items, and possibly a small personal chair if space permits. Now this means to make sure that their personal belongings do not interfere with another resident's space, proper nursing care, or with proper cleaning of the room. Residents are to be allowed to have their own personal clothing within the storage limits of the facility. It's reasonable that each resident would have adequate clothing to be properly dressed at all times, even when other clothing is being cleaned or laundered. Our residents also have the right to not be transferred or discharged from a facility except for medical reasons, the patient's own or other patient's welfare, non-payment for the stay, or when the transfer or discharge is mandated. Under Title 18 Medicare or Title 19 Medicaid of the Social Security Act, the patient shall be given at least 5 days advance notice to ensure proper orderly transfer or discharge unless the attending physician orders immediate transfer, and these actions and the reasons for them shall be documented in the patient's medical record. Since 1990, if a nursing facility plans to discharge or transfer a resident, it must follow federal regulations pertaining to transfer and discharge of residents. These federal rules are also known as Nursing Home Reform Law and OBRA, except in cases of emergency or where a resident has been in the facility less than 30 days. The nursing facility may only discharge a resident for the following reasons: non-payment for the stay, medical reasons, which would be needing to go to the hospital, a danger to others in the facility, or danger to themselves, or at the resident's request, or if the facility closes. All residents have the right to receive 30 days advance written notice of intent to discharge or transfer them unless it is an emergency discharge as outlined in federal discharge regulations. Included with the written advance notice must be information advising the resident of his right to appeal the intended discharge and a copy of the hearing request form. Our residents also have to be notified within 10 days after the facility has been issued a provisional license because of violation of the licensure regulations or receive notice of revocation of license by the North Carolina Department of Human Resources and the basis on which the provisional license or notice or revocation of license was issued. The patient's responsible family member or guardian shall also be notified. So nurse behaviors that support residents' rights include addressing our residents as Mr., Mrs., or Miss unless asked to use a specific name. Never be rude or unkind. Never withhold social responsiveness. And never ignore our resident. We must always make eye contact. Allow residents to complete sentences prior to you leaving the room, because that makes them feel like you don't care what they have to say. Do not shut or slam a door to quiet a resident, and never threaten or intentionally hurt a resident. Let's also encourage socialization. As you guys all know, mealtime is a very social time for us, so sit down and talk to your residents as they eat. We're also going to assist activities and meetings in church. Even if you don't have the same beliefs as your resident, still allow them to go to church, and sometimes they'll invite you to sit with them. That doesn't mean you're changing your religious affiliation. Also, we want to participate in planned activities, help our residents with phone calls and cards and their mail. So every time that you see a resident and you plan to provide care, explain what you're going to do, observe safety precautions, and obtain proper consent after you identify the resident. We're also going to treat all of our residents equally, promote positive attitudes, and report errors to a supervisor immediately. We also want to handle our residents' personal items carefully, add new items to a list of residents' belongings, and mark all items with the residents' names. When you feed a resident, sit with them. Again, it's a social time. Sit and talk to them. Offer a clothing protector. Do not automatically place a clothing protector on the resident to the person. We're always going to address our residents in a dignified way. listen to what they have to say, and converse with our residents in an adult manner. And we're going to respect their privacy. Don't call your resident honey or sugar or baby. So age-appropriate considerations. When we give appropriate care, we need to think about the style of dress, the hairstyle and grooming. Don't groom them to look like they're 16. Recreational activities and social activities. They may not want to watch what you watch on television, so we're going to watch what they want to watch. Don't ignore or humor the resident. Explain what care you're going to give. Promote their independence, and basically treat them like you want to be treated. You can never go wrong with that. Encourage residents to make choices. Select clothing to wear, books to read, television programs to watch. Encourage them to select food and nourishment. Select activities that may interest them, and to spend time with their friends. We also want to recognize the value of past experience. Let's validate the resident, praise age-appropriate accomplishments, and encourage adult behavior. They are adults. So our residents have the right to be free from restraint under the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1987. Residents have that right. So resident restraints. So there can be restraints can restrict voluntary movement or behavior, and they can be chemical or physical. So some facts regarding restraints. Physical restraints are also known as postural supports or protective devices. So a restraint is any manual, method, physical or mechanical device, material, or equipment attached or next to the resident's body that the individual cannot easily remove, which restricts freedom of movement or normal access to one's own body. In the past, restraints were commonly used to safeguard residents who wander or were prone to falls, were violent, not violent, but violent, at risk of hurting themselves or pulling tubes out. Abuse of restraints led to new restrictions on their use. So tucking in the top sheet so tightly that your resident cannot move is considered a restraint. Placing a wheelchair so close to a wall that it prevents the resident from getting out of the chair, that is a restraint. Pulling up full side rails to prevent the patient from getting out of bed, that is a restraints cannot be used for convenience or for discipline. Unnecessary use of restraint is considered false imprisonment. Acceptable reasons to use a restraint are temporary for life-threatening medical conditions in an emergency, brief periods to allow medical treatment to proceed if there is documented evidence of resident or legal approval of the treatment, when alternatives to restraints are not effective, however, and the physician orders restraints, it becomes essential for the nurse aide to know the risks involved in caring for these residents. Types of acceptable physical restraints, if ordered: side rails on a bed, special chairs such as a geriatric chair, lap cushions or a lap tray, vests and jacket restraints, safety belt restraints, soft ties for wrists and ankles. So the trend now is toward providing restraint-free facilities where restraints are not used for any reason and not kept in any facility. So some alternatives to restraints. So interventions used instead of restraints include distribute alternatives to restraints, power, blah, blah, blah. Some of the things you can actually do is to have friends and family or volunteers known as private sitters or private nurse aides can watch and calm down a resident. Have interesting activities to distract them. If you answer the call bell promptly, it's amazing how you don't need to restrain someone because you're engaged with them. I always tell people, if you tell me you're going to be back in 10 minutes, I expect to see you in 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to come looking for you. The elderly who are sitting oftentimes don't have anything to do but look for you, and they look for you to come and visit them. Other things we can do is exercise and outdoor activities. We can also do consistent reality orientation or validation in staff assignments. So we talk about what's going on right now. So residents who wander, we can have their rooms close to the nurse's station. We can also post a stop sign, believe it or not. It's a very simple reminder, but post it on a confused resident's door, and they will not pass it usually. Partial bed rails prevent residents from rolling out of the bed while allowing them the freedom to get up if they wish. Positioning devices and wedges, such as wedge cushions, placed in wheelchairs prevent sliding forward. Furniture, such as low beds, rocking chairs, or recliners, are good for restraint alternatives. Also, easy release belt reminders that the resident can actually undo, but it floor cushions or pads next to the bed decrease injuries if the resident does fall when they get out of bed. Electronic warning devices on the bed or on wheelchairs, and doors help alert staff when someone gets out of bed without help. So we're going to pause now and do 1.03a, which is applying a personal electronic warning device.